there, it's me, SpongeBob. Welcome to Sleepy Sponge Lore, a place where the secrets of Bikini Bottom drift like dreams beneath the waves. So take a deep breath, get comfy, and let the ocean carry you to sleep. Let the video begin.
It began in a way that no one could ever fully explain. Not with maps or science or careful notes written in waterproof ink. Some things are too quiet to be explained, too gentle to be pinned down. Like how a sponge of all things could carry inside it the beginnings of a boy who laughed too easily, who dreamed too widely, and who carried with him the strange, unshakable hope that one day he might find where he belonged. The ocean is full of secrets. It hums with them, sings with them. Every wave carries a memory from long before we were born, and every bubble seems to whisper a promise. And in one small corner of this vast and ancient sea, there was a home unlike any other, a house shaped like a pineapple, glowing faintly golden beneath the soft sway of seaweed. Inside that pineapple lived the boy of bubbles. His name was SpongeBob. He was not like others, not because he was a sponge, though that already set him apart, but because he carried within him a warmth that refused to dim. He was made of softness through and through, the kind of softness that the world often overlooks but secretly needs, the kind of softness that bends, stretches, and adapts without breaking. When he was very young, the neighbors found him strange. He would chase jellyfish across the meadow of the sea as though they were stars he could catch with his hands. He would sit for hours listening to the way currents hummed against coral, as if they were lullabies meant only for him. He laughed at small things, the way a bubble floated sideways, the way sand tickled between toes. Sometimes, even when he was alone, his giggles echoed like a song through the streets of Bikini Bottom. Yet, like many children who feel too much, SpongeBob also felt the weight of not quite fitting in. There were days he tried to be like others, but his attempts always spilled over with too much joy, too much hope, too much of himself. He was told he was too excitable, too strange, too much, and for a time he wondered if maybe that was true. But here is the quiet truth. What seems too much to one person is exactly enough for another. The sea knew it. The waves knew it. And deep down, SpongeBob's heart knew it too. He just hadn't found the right place yet. At night, when the currents grew still and the moonlight shivered down through the waves, SpongeBob would dream. His dreams were not of treasure nor of fame. They were of belonging, of waking in the morning with purpose, of putting his hands, those square, clumsy hands, to work in a way that made someone else smile. Sometimes he would dream of spatulas, though he didn't fully understand why. He imagined one in his hand, shining, steady, like a knight might hold a sword. Only this sword wasn't meant for battle. It was meant for something gentler, to turn food, to nourish, to serve. He didn't know it yet, but even his dreams were pointing him toward his path. He often whispered to himself before sleep, "One day I'll find it. My place. My beginning." And the sea, in its endless patience, would answer with the faint rush of waves against rock, like a mother shushing a child into rest. From the very start, SpongeBob carried something most of us lose as we grow, the ability to see magic in ordinary things. A soap bubble wasn't just air wrapped in water. It was a globe of possibility, a floating planet that reflected colors no brush could paint. A jellyfish wasn't just a creature with stings. It was a lantern in motion, drifting with grace. Even his morning routine of brushing his square teeth and straightening his little tie felt like a kind of ceremony to him, as if each act prepared him for a destiny he could almost feel but not yet see. And in the quiet moments, there was always the ocean's voice. He swore he could hear it, though no one else seemed to notice. A hum, a murmur, sometimes almost like words, as though the sea itself were encouraging him, telling him to keep going, to keep dreaming. Perhaps it was only imagination. But sometimes imagination is the truest kind of truth. There is something tender about beginnings. They never feel like beginnings while we are living them. At the time, SpongeBob only thought of himself as an odd boy in a pineapple house, with neighbors who rolled their eyes and friends who didn't always understand him. But in truth, he was already on the path.
Every bubble he blew, every jellyfish he chased,
Every laugh that filled his chest, all of it was shaping him, gently, quietly, into who he was meant to be. One evening, as the sea dark deepened to indigo and the glow of bioluminescent fish flickered in the distance, SpongeBob stood outside his pineapple home and looked up. Above him, past the surface, the moon swayed in the rippling water, silver and soft. He wondered, as he often did, if someone up there was also wondering about him. He wondered if everyone felt this way, full of hope, full of longing, not sure where it all led. He placed his hands together as if holding a prayer, though he didn't call it that.
he only whispered, "Please,
Let me find where I belong." The ocean answered in the way it always did, a current brushing past him, carrying the warmth of unseen places, unseen futures. He closed his eyes and smiled, for even if he didn't know what was ahead, he knew the journey was waiting. And for SpongeBob, that was enough. It is here, in this tender moment, that our story truly begins. With a boy made of sponge, standing beneath the stars and bubbles, dreaming of a purpose that seemed as distant as the moon. He did not yet know of spatulas or fryers, or the place that would one day feel like home. He did not yet know the names of those who would shape his heart. But he knew deep inside that life was calling him forward. And perhaps you know that feeling too. The quiet ache of beginnings, the sense that something is waiting just beyond the horizon of your days.
if so, then you already understand SpongeBob better than you realize."
Because he, like you, was simply searching for a place where his heart could rest, and where his joy could be of use. And so the boy of bubbles went to sleep, tucked beneath the steady hum of the sea, his dreams wrapping around him like a blanket. The waves whispered, the moon watched, and somewhere in the distance, destiny stirred like the faint glow of morning. Tomorrow would be the first step, but tonight was for dreaming. Childhood, for SpongeBob, was not marked by great achievements or milestones the way some might imagine. It was measured instead in bubbles, in laughter, and in the small rituals that filled the space of days. Each morning began with the glow of seawater trickling through the coral windows of his pineapple home. He would stir awake slowly, blinking at the shifting patterns on the walls, as though the ocean itself had painted them there just for him. There was a comfort in his routines. He brushed his teeth with quiet seriousness, though his toothbrush often slipped in his clumsy square hands. He straightened his tie even when there was nowhere to go, and polished his shoes so carefully that they reflected the light of the kelp forest outside. To him, these simple acts were not about appearance, but about readiness, as though each day might hold something important, and he wanted to be prepared, just in case. Outside, the streets of Bikini Bottom stirred with their own rhythm. Neighbors passed by with nods, though not always with warmth. Some of them found SpongeBob odd, too excitable, too noisy, always humming or skipping. He tried to match their quiet seriousness, but sooner or later a bubble would slip from his mouth, or a laugh would escape uninvited, and then they would shake their heads, muttering that he was still just a silly boy. But SpongeBob was not alone. Childhood gave him two anchors that held him steady, even when the world felt too large or too dismissive. One was Patrick, his dearest friend, a starfish with a simple heart and a laughter that matched his own. Patrick did not care if SpongeBob was too loud or too strange. In fact, he delighted in it. Together, they would chase jellyfish across the meadow, their hands reaching toward the drifting creatures like children reaching for falling stars. They would lie on their backs in the sand, watching the bubbles rise and invent entire worlds in the shapes they saw. Patrick was not clever in the way others measured cleverness, but he had something rarer, a faith so steady that it made SpongeBob feel less alone. "One day," Patrick would say, "we'll do something amazing, you'll see." And SpongeBob would believe him, because Patrick's words always sounded like truth, even when they were spoken between bites of a peanut butter and seaweed sandwich. The other anchor was not a friend, but the sea itself. SpongeBob often wandered alone to the edge of the reef, where the water grew darker and the silence deepened. He would sit on a rock, knees tucked in, and listen. The sea spoke in ways only he seemed to hear, sometimes in the hush of currents, sometimes in the sigh of shifting sands. It told him he was part of something vast and ancient, even if he did not yet understand how. Those moments became a kind of secret, a comfort he could carry back with him when the days felt heavy. There were struggles, of course.
School was never easy for him.
He wanted to please, to do well, but his eagerness often bubbled over into mistakes. When asked to write neatly, he filled his paper with doodles in the margins. When told to be quiet, he raised his hand so high it nearly touched the ceiling.
Other children snickered.
Sometimes even the teacher sighed. SpongeBob would flush with embarrassment, but his spirit was hard to dim. By the next morning, he would rise with the same optimism, convinced that today he might finally get it right. His parents, kind though practical, didn't always understand him either. They loved him deeply, but they worried. They saw a boy full of energy yet without direction, and they wondered how he would ever find a place in the world. At night, they whispered in the kitchen, their voices carrying through the walls. SpongeBob heard, though he never let on. Their worry hurt him, but it also stirred in him a quiet determination to prove that he was capable, that his joy had a purpose. The truth is, childhood is rarely simple for those who carry unusual hearts. SpongeBob often felt torn between the world's demand for seriousness and his own irrepressible lightness. But slowly, gently, he began to learn that his quirks, the very things others saw as flaws, were also his gifts. His laughter made Patrick feel less alone. His boundless imagination turned empty afternoons into adventures. His persistence, even in failure, hinted at a strength that no one yet recognized. One memory stood out more than most. He and Patrick had once spent an entire afternoon trying to build a bubble so large it could hold them both inside. They tried again and again, each attempt collapsing in a wet pop that left them laughing harder. Hours passed and the reef grew dark. Finally, as the last light of day filtered down, they managed it, a bubble wide enough to surround them. For a brief, shimmering moment they floated inside it, suspended in their own tiny world. SpongeBob pressed his hands against the bubble's surface, awed by the rainbow colors rippling across it. Patrick whispered, "It feels like we're inside a dream." The bubble burst a heartbeat later, but the memory lingered. For SpongeBob, it was proof that even the silliest dreams could be touched, if only for a moment. And so his childhood carried on, full of small wonders, quiet doubts, and steady friendships. He grew not in leaps, but in gentle ripples each day, shaping him as the tide shapes stone. He was not aware then that his quirks were teaching him skills more valuable than neat handwriting or proper seriousness. Patience, persistence, a heart that found meaning in the smallest joys. By the time he grew older, the world still saw him as odd, but within him something deeper had taken root, a faith, fragile yet unyielding, that he was meant for something more. And though he did not yet know it, his childhood had already given him the tools he would need for the journey ahead. For the boy of Bubbles, childhood was not a chapter to outgrow, but a foundation to carry always. And even now, if you listen closely to the sea, you might hear the echoes of his laughter drifting through the currents. A reminder that beginnings are never wasted, and that the strange, soft hearts among us are often the ones that shine the brightest. There are certain places in the world that seem ordinary to most, yet extraordinary to a few. To passers-by, they are just buildings, walls, doors, signs. But to someone searching for purpose, they glow with a kind of secret invitation, as if whispering, here is where you are meant to stand. For SpongeBob, that place was the Krusty Krab. It wasn't grand or elegant. Its roof was made of weathered wood, shaped like a barrel turned on its side. Its windows gleamed faintly with the smell of oil and salt, and the wooden signs swayed gently in the ocean's current. Customers came and went, their fins brushing the sandy floor as they carried trays of simple meals. To most it was just a place to grab a bite, to still the hunger of a long day. But to SpongeBob, every glimpse of it made his chest stir with something unexplainable. He would pass it often on his way to the meadow, where he chased jellyfish with Patrick. He would slow his steps, staring at the door, watching workers in their aprons bustle back and forth. The sizzle of the grill would drift into the street, mingling with the chatter of diners. And each time, SpongeBob felt it, a gentle pull like a current nudging him toward the shore. "What is it about that place?" Patrick once asked, his voice muffled by a mouthful of coral chips. SpongeBob didn't quite know how to answer. He only shrugged, though his eyes lingered on the glowing sign.
"It feels important," he whispered.
"Like maybe I'm supposed to be there," Patrick chewed thoughtfully and then smiled. "Then maybe you will be." The Krusty Krab lived in SpongeBob's imagination long after he walked away from it. At night, he would dream of standing behind the counter, a spatula in his hand.
Not a sword, not a shield, just a spatula.
Simple, steady and shining. He imagined flipping golden patties with care, serving them to waiting hands, seeing smiles spread across tired faces. It wasn't glory he craved. It wasn't wealth. It was the quiet satisfaction of giving something that made another's day softer, warmer, better. To others, it might have sounded silly. To dream of fast food when the world was full of grander ambitions. But to SpongeBob, it was sacred. For him, food wasn't just food. It was comfort. It was kindness you could taste. It was a way of saying you matter without needing any words. As he grew older, the pull only deepened. Some mornings he would stand outside the Krusty Krab before the doors opened, pressing his hands against the glass, peering inside as though looking into another life. He memorized the hum of the fryer, the creak of the register, even the sound of the mop dragging across the floor. Every detail stitched itself into his longing until he could no longer separate the place from his sense of purpose. But purpose can be a tricky thing. It does not arrive with certainty. It arrives as a whisper, a stirring, something half-believed. And so SpongeBob hesitated.
Again and again he thought of walking through those doors, asking for a chance. Again and again he convinced himself he wasn't ready. "What if I'm not good enough?"
he confessed to the sea one night, sitting alone at the reef's edge. "What if they laugh?"
"What if I can't do it?"
The ocean answered, as it always did, with a hush and a hum, as if saying, "You'll never know until you try." And so the idea grew, fragile but persistent. SpongeBob began to practice at home. His little kitchen became his training ground. He flipped seaweed sandwiches with exaggerated care, timing each turn as though he were rehearsing for an audience. He scribbled recipes in notebooks, doodling tiny spatulas in the margins. Sometimes Patrick would join him, cheering loudly at each successful flip. Other times, SpongeBob practiced in silence, his determination wrapped in solitude. The more he practiced, the more the dream took root. It wasn't about proving others wrong anymore. It wasn't even about proving himself right. It was about love. Love for the craft, for the simple art of turning ingredients into something nourishing. He wanted to honor that love, to give it a place in the world. Still, doubt lingered. The neighbors shook their heads, whispering that he was odd. His parents worried he was chasing a fantasy too small to sustain him.
Even Squidward, the neighbor across the street, rolled his eyes when SpongeBob spoke of his dream. A fry cook.
Squidward scoffed one afternoon. Of all the things you could be, you want to stand over a greasy grill all day. That's not ambition.
That's embarrassment. The word stung.
But SpongeBob only smiled, though it was a fragile smile. Maybe it looks small to you, he said softly, but it feels big to me. And that was the quiet courage of SpongeBob. Even when doubt pressed heavy on his shoulders, he carried his dream gently, like a bubble balanced on the tip of his finger. One evening, as he lay in bed beneath the hum of the ocean, SpongeBob felt it more strongly than ever. The call of the Krusty Krab. It was not a shout, not a demand, just a steady pull, like the tide drawing him closer. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow. Tomorrow I will try. And with that promise resting in his chest, he drifted into sleep. His dreams were filled with golden spatulas and smiling faces, with the soft hiss of oil and the warmth of belonging. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if he would succeed or fail. But he knew finally that he had to take the step. For some places are not just places. They are beginnings. And for SpongeBob, the Krusty Krab was not merely a restaurant. It was the doorway into his destiny. The night before, a new beginning always feels different. The air hums with a quiet electricity, as though the world itself knows something is about to change. For SpongeBob, that night was wrapped in both restlessness and tenderness, a mixture of nerves and hope. He had made the decision. Tomorrow he would step through the doors of the Krusty Krab and ask for a chance. Just the thought filled him with equal parts excitement and dread. All day his heart had been a fluttering thing inside his chest, beating too fast, skipping ahead to moments that hadn't even arrived yet. At sunset, the ocean grew hushed. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the glow of lanternfish shimmered in the distance. SpongeBob sat by his window, looking out at the reef as it softened into night. He held his spatula in his hand, not a real one from the Krusty Krab, but the simple metal tool he had used for years in his own kitchen. He polished it with a rag, staring at its smooth surface as though it were a mirror reflecting his hopes back at him. Tomorrow, he whispered. The word trembled, but it did not break. Patrick had been by earlier, full of encouragement. You're going to do amazing, he had said, munching loudly on a cookie. They'll probably give you the job the second you walk in. His confidence was as steady as ever, but SpongeBob knew it wouldn't be that simple. Dreams rarely were. Still, the faith in Patrick's voice had warmed him. It was enough to make him believe that maybe, just maybe, he could succeed. As the night deepened, SpongeBob tried to calm himself with his usual rituals. He tidied his little house, scrubbing each corner until it gleamed. He prepared his clothes for the morning, laying them out neatly, his crisp white shirt, his brown shorts, his tie carefully folded. He even placed his shoes by the door, polished until they caught the faint shimmer of the moonlight. Each small act steadied him, reminding him that he could at least control these tiny details. But sleep did not come easily. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the ocean outside. Every time he closed his eyes, his thoughts began to race.
What if I make a fool of myself?
What if I forget how to cook?
What if they laugh at me?
Doubt swirled around him like a current too strong to fight. Yet beneath the doubt, another voice lingered, softer, steadier, the same voice he had always felt in the sea's murmurs. It told him not to measure himself by others' opinions, not to shrink just because the world did not yet understand him. It reminded him that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to step forward even with fear at your side. So SpongeBob breathed slowly, letting the rhythm of the water guide him.
Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale.
With each breath, he imagined bubbles rising, floating toward the surface, carrying his worries away. Memories of his childhood drifted through his mind. The bubble he and Patrick had built, large enough to sit inside, the laughter that had filled the meadow, the way his parents' eyes had softened when he showed them his strange inventions. Each memory was a thread, stitching together a reminder that his strangeness had always carried meaning, even if others did not always see it. Eventually, his eyelids grew heavy. His thoughts slowed, settling into a dreamlike haze. He imagined himself standing behind the counter of the Krusty Krab, spatula in hand, flipping patties with a rhythm as natural as breathing. He saw customers smiling, Squidward sighing in the background, Patrick cheering from a booth. The dream wrapped around him like a warm blanket, carrying him into a light, restless sleep. When dawn came, it was gentle. The ocean shifted from indigo to pale gold, the first light filtering through kelp leaves and coral windows. SpongeBob stirred awake, blinking against the glow. For a moment, he forgot why his heart was beating so quickly. Then he remembered. Today was the day. He rose carefully, as though moving too quickly might shatter the fragile courage he had built through the night. His clothes waited for him by the door, neat and ready. He dressed with care, smoothing the wrinkles from his shirt, tying his tie twice to make sure it was just right. He slipped on his polished shoes and looked at himself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was not grand or imposing. He was small, square, almost silly-looking. But his eyes were bright, filled with something larger than their size. Hope. Today, he whispered again. The words still trembled, but this time it carried weight. Before leaving, he paused by the door, pressing his hand against the wood. The house had held his dreams for so long, echoing with laughter, practicing flips, whispered promises. Now it would wait for him, quiet and still, while he took his first steps outward. He felt a pang of fear, but also a thrill of possibility. Outside, the ocean was alive with morning. Schools of fish darted through the currents, their scales glinting like coins of light. Sea plants swayed gently, releasing tiny bubbles that rose in spirals. The streets of Bikini Bottom stirred with early footsteps, neighbors greeting the day. SpongeBob walked among them, his small figure moving with determination, though his hands shook at his sides. Each step toward the Krusty Krab felt like a step deeper into his own heart. The building loomed ahead, ordinary to everyone else, extraordinary to him. He stopped for a moment across the street, staring at its weathered walls, at the sign swaying above the door. His chest tightened. He thought of turning back, of saying, "Not today, maybe tomorrow." But then he remembered the ocean's whisper, the feeling of the tide urging him forward. He remembered Patrick's easy faith, the laughter of childhood, the dream that had carried him this far. And with a breath that was half nervous, half brave, SpongeBob stepped off the curb. The dawn of courage had arrived. The Krusty Krab stood quietly in the morning light, its wooden walls warmed by the golden glow of dawn. To most of Bikini Bottom, it was just a humble burger shack. To SpongeBob, however, it was a temple of dreams, the place where his deepest longings might finally take shape. He paused outside the door, his reflection caught faintly in the glass. His tie felt too tight, his shoes too shiny. He clutched his spatula like a knight might hold his sword, though his hands trembled so much he feared he might drop it. What if they turn me away?
What if I don't belong here?
The thoughts buzzed like small, stinging jellyfish. But then came another softer whisper, the one that had carried him through the long night before. You will never know until you step inside. And so, with a breath that quivered but did not falter, SpongeBob pushed the door open. The familiar creak of the hinges sang in his ears, though he had only ever heard it from outside. Now it welcomed him in, carrying the scent of sizzling oil and warm bread. The room was empty, still sleepy from the early hour. Wooden tables stood in rows, their surfaces reflecting faint sunlight that spilled through the round windows. Behind the counter stood Squidward, his tall, slender frame leaning lazily against the register. He looked as though the morning itself had dragged him unwillingly into consciousness. His eyes lifted, unimpressed, at the small figure entering. "Oh, it's you!" Squidward's voice was flat, carrying the weight of indifference. SpongeBob swallowed. "Good morning, Squidward." His voice cracked with nervous enthusiasm, bouncing far too brightly in the still air. Squidward sighed. "It's too early for this." From the kitchen, a rustle and a clatter broke the silence. Then came the booming voice of Mr. Krabs. "Who's walking through me doors at this hour?" The crustacean stepped out, his large claws glinting faintly, his eyes narrowing until they landed on SpongeBob. Recognition flickered. "Ah, the lad who's been sniffing around me establishment, eh?" Mr. Krabs grinned, his tone both amused and wary. "What brings you here this fine morning?" SpongeBob's throat tightened. His carefully rehearsed words tangled together, refusing to align. He fumbled, then straightened his shoulders, gripping his spatula like a lifeline. "Mr. Krabs, sir."
I've always dreamed of working here. I want to cook. I want to serve. I want
to be part of the Krusty Krab. His words came out too fast, tumbling over each other like stones in a rushing stream. But his eyes shone with sincerity, and that glow could not be hidden. Mr. Krab studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Squidward muttered, "Please say no." At last, Mr. Krabs chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "You've got spirit, lad. I'll give you that. But spirit don't fry a patty." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing shrewdly. "So here's the deal. I'll not hand you the job on a silver platter. You'll prove yourself first. Show me you can handle the heat of me kitchen." SpongeBob's heart fluttered wildly. A test, a chance.
exactly what he had both feared and longed for. "Yes, sir,"
He squeaked too loudly, his voice echoing off the walls. He blushed, but Mr. Krabs only laughed again. "Then step this way,
lad." The kitchen door swung open, revealing the heart of the Krusty Krab. The air inside was thicker,
warm with the scent of frying oil and spices. Pots clattered, pans gleamed, and in the center sat the griddle, waiting like a stage awaiting its performer. SpongeBob stepped inside, and for a moment he felt as though he had entered a sacred place. His knees wobbled, his palms grew damp. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, and now that it was real, it felt impossibly heavy. Mr. Krabs clapped a claw on his shoulder. "Listen well, boyo.
Cooking here ain't just about food.
It's about speed, about precision, about making customers happy so they keep coming back."
Can you handle that?
SpongeBob nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. Could he really? What if his hands slipped? What if the patties burned? The voice of fear was loud, but another voice pushed back. "You've waited for this all your life. Don't let fear hold the spatula." Squidward peeked in from the doorway, smirking.
This is going to be a disaster. SpongeBob forced himself to stand taller, though his legs shook.
He took his place at the griddle, spatula poised. His reflection shivered faintly on the hot surface, distorted by waves of heat. Mr. Krabs barked, "All right then, lad. Show me what you can do. Cook me one perfect patty." The words rang like a challenge, like a bell that marked the beginning of a trial. SpongeBob drew a slow breath, steadying his hands. He remembered the nights in his small kitchen, flipping patties for no one but himself. He remembered Patrick cheering at his clumsy first attempts, his parents smiling gently even when the bread was burnt. Those moments had been practice, he realized now. Preparation for this very instant. Still, the weight of the griddle, the expectation in Mr. Krab's eyes, the skepticism in Squidward's smirk, They pressed down on him like the ocean itself. His heart pounded loud as a drum. As he reached for the ingredients, his hand shook. The buns slipped slightly in his grip. The patty sizzled on the griddle with a sound that startled him. He nearly dropped his spatula, catching it at the last second with a gasp. Squidward snickered from the door. Mr. Krabs arched a brow. Doubt surged like a wave, threatening to sweep him away.
Maybe I can't do this.
Maybe they were right all along, but then as he stared at the sizzling patty, something softened inside him. The sound of it was not frightening. It was familiar, comforting even, like the crackle of a warm fire. The scent of it rising was the scent of his own little kitchen, the scent of mornings filled with laughter and practice. The patty hissed, and with it came a memory, bubbles drifting upward, carrying his worries away. SpongeBob breathed deeply. The fear loosened its grip. He tightened his hold on the spatula. His eyes focused, steady now. "I can do this," he whispered, so faintly only the sizzling griddle heard him, and with that he flipped the patty. The motion was smooth, clean, almost graceful. For the first time since stepping inside, SpongeBob felt not like a boy pretending, but like a cook at home. The kitchen fell silent, waiting. The first patty sizzled on the griddle, its aroma rising like a gentle hymn. SpongeBob's hands, once trembling, now moved with a newfound steadiness. The spatula felt lighter, as though it belonged in his grip, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. He placed the finished patty between the bun, careful, reverent, like a jeweler setting a stone. The sandwich looked simple, humble, but to SpongeBob it was more than food. It was a promise fulfilled. Mr. Krabs leaned close, studying it. His great claw lifted the bun, examined the patty, pressed the bread between finger and shell. He gave nothing away, his face unreadable. Squidward groaned from the doorway.
Oh, come on. It's just a sandwich. But Mr. Krabs didn't answer.
Instead, he took a slow, deliberate bite. The sound of the crisp edge breaking filled the quiet kitchen. SpongeBob held his breath, a pause, a chew. Then the faintest curl of a smile touched Mr. Krabs's face. Not bad, lad. Not bad at all. SpongeBob's heart swelled, brighter than the morning sun outside. But before relief could settle, Mr. Krabs' eyes sharpened. One patty, though. One patty proves nothing. Customers don't come in for one patty. They come in for dozens. They come hungry, and they leave expecting more.
If you want this job, lad, you'll show me you can handle the real fire. He snapped his claw, and in an instant the calm kitchen shifted. Mr. Krabs bellowed, "Order up!"
as though invisible customers filled the room. 5 patties quick as you can.
Then 10 more after that.
SpongeBob froze.
5 patties, 10 more.
His small body stiffened under the weight of it. The griddle suddenly seemed enormous, a battlefield of heat and smoke. Squidward chuckled low. This is where he burns out. But SpongeBob gripped his spatula tighter. His fear whispered again. Too much, too fast. But something else rose stronger. You've practiced for this. You know the rhythm. Trust your hands. So he moved. The patties hissed as they hit the griddle, the sound like waves rushing to shore. He flipped one, then 2, the motions quick but careful. His eyes darted from bun to lettuce to tomato, his movements weaving a dance between heat and time. At first, it was clumsy.
One bun slipped to the floor, landing face down.
A tomato slice clung stubbornly to his cheek. Grease popped, and SpongeBob yelped as a tiny drop stung his arm. For a heartbeat, he faltered, but then something shifted. He remembered the way his mother used to hum softly while stirring pots, how her song had turned every meal into more than food, into love. SpongeBob hummed now, too, a shaky tune that steadied his breathing, and with the tune came rhythm. The patties flipped in arcs, landing neatly. The buns slid together in order, soft and golden. SpongeBob's spatula moved not with panic, but with flow, each motion flowing into the next like a tide. Mr. Krabs watched, his grin widening. Squidward rolled his eyes, But even he stopped mocking for a moment, caught in the hypnotic rhythm of it all. One patty, then another. 5 became 10. 10 became 20. SpongeBob's hands moved faster, but never carelessly. Each sandwich he set on the counter gleamed with care, as though crafted not for strangers, but for dear friends. The kitchen, once heavy with tension, now glowed with a strange peace. Even the hiss of the griddle sounded softer, more like a lullaby than a challenge. Still, doubt crept in.
What if I drop them? What if I lose count?
His chest tightened, his vision blurred with the steam. For a moment he wavered, the mountain of patties seeming impossible. But then, through the haze, he caught sight of his reflection faintly in the steel of the counter. His wide, earnest eyes stared back at him. He looked small, yes.
Nervous, yes.
But he also looked determined. "You can do this," he whispered again, barely audible. And somehow the whisper carried strength. Time blurred. Patties flipped and buns stacked. The rhythm became its own kind of meditation. Not thought, not struggle, just presence. Just being. At last the griddle cleared. The final patty sizzled into place, perfectly golden. SpongeBob set it gently between its bun and slid it onto the counter. Then at last he lowered his spatula, his chest rising and falling with tired breaths. The mountain of sandwiches gleamed in the kitchen light, a small miracle built from sizzling oil and steady hands. Silence followed. Squidward sniffed, unimpressed, but there was the faintest crack in his mask, a reluctant flicker of surprise. Mr. Krabs, however, laughed loud and booming. "But Davy Jones' locker, lad, you've got it."
You've got the heart, the skill, the speed. I never thought I'd see the day. His claw clapped SpongeBob's shoulder so hard, the spatula clattered to the floor.
"Welcome to the Krusty Krab." The words echoed in SpongeBob's ears like music. His knees wobbled.
His throat tightened.
For a moment he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead he just smiled, the widest, truest smile he had ever worn. Outside, the first real customers of the day began to drift in, drawn by the scent that lingered in the water. They didn't know it yet, but the boy who had just found his place behind the counter would soon be the soul of this small restaurant. And SpongeBob, still holding the echo of his dream in his chest, whispered to himself, "I did it." The smell of sizzling patties drifted out of the kitchen, curling like soft ribbons through the wooden beams of the Krusty Krab. It wove its way past empty tables, out the round glass doors, and into the wider streets of Bikini Bottom. Like a whisper, it called to the early risers, the curious, the hungry, and those who had walked by many mornings but never stopped. SpongeBob stood at the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, spatula still warm in his hand, his chest still racing from the trial of fire he had just passed. He could hardly believe it.
A job, a beginning.
A dream, no longer just in his head, but beneath his very shoes. Through the glass door came the first figure, an elderly fish with gentle fins and tired eyes, moving slowly but surely toward a seat by the window. A couple followed, their laughter easy and warm as they leaned into one another. Then a child darted in, wide-eyed, tugging at a parent's hand, drawn by the scent as though it were magic. The Krusty Krab, once silent, now hummed with life. The scrape of chairs, the rustle of fins against wood, the low buzz of voices blending together. It was the sound of possibility. Mr. Krab's eyes gleamed at the sight.
"Ah, customers," he murmured, rubbing his claws together as though polishing treasure.
The sweetest sight in the 7 seas. Squidward, however, groaned, already slumping behind the cash register. Wonderful. Let the monotony begin, SpongeBob's heart pounded. He had practiced cooking for hours, for days, for years, but serving real customers, people who would taste his food, who might smile or frown because of something he had made. This was different. He felt small and large at once, as though the moment stretched bigger than his square little frame. He took a step forward.
Then another.
His shoes tapped lightly on the wooden floor. The customers glanced up, curious at the new face behind the counter. SpongeBob swallowed hard, then beamed the brightest smile he could muster. "Welcome to the Krusty Krab," he said, voice soft but shining with sincerity. It's an honor to serve you today." The words felt clumsy, but true, and truth, as it often does, carried further than perfection. The elderly fish chuckled, the corners of his tired mouth lifting. "Well, aren't you polite?" he said, settling into his seat. The child giggled. "He talks funny," she whispered to her parent, though her eyes gleamed with delight. SpongeBob hurried to the register, nearly tripping in his nervous excitement. Squidward rolled his eyes, muttered something under his breath, and shoved a notepad toward him. "Take their orders before you burst from enthusiasm." With shaking hands, SpongeBob approached the first table. "Good morning, sir. May I take your order?" His voice was careful, reverent, as though the menu were sacred scripture. The old fish smiled faintly. "Just a simple Krabby Patty, son." "That'll do," SpongeBob nodded solemnly, jotting it down with exaggerated care. To him, it wasn't just a Krabby Patty. It was the Krabby Patty, the first he would serve to someone other than himself. At the couple's table, the woman leaned in. "2 patties, please. With extra pickles on one," her partner grinned. "And a side of kelp fries." "Thank you, young man." Each word was written like a treasure onto SpongeBob's pad. He bowed slightly, too deeply, almost tumbling over, before hurrying back to the kitchen. The griddle welcomed him with a hiss, the flames flickering like eager friends. SpongeBob set to work, humming softly under his breath. His nerves trembled at first, but the rhythm returned, the rhythm he had found during his test. The patties flipped, the buns toasted, the lettuce settled gently into place. When the first plate was ready, SpongeBob carried it out himself. His hands shook, but he steadied them with a quiet thought. This is not just food. This is care, shaped into something warm. He placed the plate before the elderly fish. "Here you are, sir. 1 Krabby Patty, made with care." The old fish chuckled again. "Made with care, eh? Let's see." He took a slow bite, chewing carefully. Then his eyes widened slightly, surprised. He nodded. "Not bad at all, son."
"Not bad at all," SpongeBob's chest glowed.
The words were simple, but to him they rang like music. At the couple's table, he laid down their food with equal care, bowing slightly again. The woman took a bite, then smiled across the table. "Delicious," her partner raised a fin in agreement. "We'll be coming back." SpongeBob's eyes glistened. He wanted to shout, to laugh, to dance, but instead he simply whispered, "Thank you." The child at the back tugged at her parent.
"I want one too."
And so another order was made and another patty sizzled on the griddle. Soon the Krusty Krab filled with chatter, with the clink of plates, with laughter and conversation. Each time SpongeBob carried a plate out, he carried a piece of his heart with it. Each smile he received in return felt like a star lighting up inside him. Even Squidward, though still slouched, found himself glancing over with the faintest curiosity. He muttered, "Ridiculous," but his voice lacked its usual sharpness. Mr. Krabs, meanwhile, beamed at the clinking coins that began to gather in the register.
"Aye, lad," he whispered when SpongeBob passed by.
"You've got the gift. Customers don't just come for food, they come for the feeling you give 'em.
And yay, boyo."
You make 'em feel welcome." The day flowed onward, gentle and steady. SpongeBob's feet ached, his hands grew sore, but his heart never dimmed. For the first time, he felt woven into the fabric of something larger. A place, a purpose, a rhythm that matched the quiet drum of his soul. And when the last customer of the morning left, leaving behind only crumbs and the faint scent of satisfaction. SpongeBob stood in the empty dining room, exhausted and radiant. He whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning," and the wooden walls seemed to echo back, soft and kind, as though they believed him. The Krusty Krab grew still again once the morning crowd had drifted back into the streets of Bikini Bottom. The chairs stood empty, crumbs clung to tabletops, and the smell of fried patties lingered like the aftertaste of a dream. SpongeBob leaned against the counter, his small, square shoulders sagging with both joy and exhaustion. His first real customers had eaten, smiled, and left satisfied. That truth shone within him like a lantern. And yet, beneath the glow, a quieter current stirred. What if tomorrow is different? He thought. What if I can't keep it up? The weight of belonging pressed gently on him, not cruel, but steady, reminding him that to hold a place in the world means to carry both joy and duty. Mr. Krabs busied himself behind the counter, humming cheerfully as he counted coins into neat stacks. Each clink was a note of satisfaction, a song only he could hear. Squidward, as ever, sat slouched at the register, sketching half-hearted doodles in his order pad, as though trying to erase the memory of working at all. And SpongeBob, in the quiet middle of it all, felt the tide of his thoughts rising and falling. He slipped back into the kitchen, where the griddle was cooling, its once fierce hiss, now a faint whisper. The spatula lay across it, streaked with oil and crumbs, tired but proud. SpongeBob picked it up, running a hand over its smooth handle. "You did well today," he murmured, speaking to it as though it were a friend. And in truth it was his truest companion through every moment of doubt. But as he set it aside, his reflection caught in the polished steel of the counter. His face looked different now. Not the boy who had stood trembling outside the Krusty Krab that morning, but someone older in spirit, marked by the first taste of responsibility. It frightened him. Just a little, a voice floated in from the dining room.
"You really think you can keep this up?"
Squidward, his tone flat as ever, had wandered into the kitchen doorway. He leaned lazily against the frame, arms crossed. "One busy morning, and you're glowing like you've conquered the ocean. Wait until the days pile up. Wait until you've flipped the 1,000th patty and no one even looks at you. Then we'll see." The words cut deeper than SpongeBob wanted them to. He tried to smile, but the smile faltered. "But
"Isn't it worth it if people are happy?"
Squidward shrugged. "Happiness fades. Work stays the same. You'll learn." He drifted away again, leaving only silence behind. SpongeBob's heart sank, heavy with the echo.
What if Squidward was right?
What if joy dulled with repetition? But then, from the corner of the kitchen, came the faintest hum, his own voice, still carrying the tune he had sung to steady his hands earlier. The sound reminded him happiness wasn't always about grand moments. Sometimes it was found in rhythm, in the small acts that stitched days together. Still the doubts lingered. When the shift finally ended, SpongeBob stepped out into the soft light of evening. The streets shimmered in the fading glow, and the ocean above cast ripples of gold that swayed like lullabies. Patrick was waiting by the rock where he often sat, swinging his legs idly. "There you are!" Patrick's grin was wide, as if nothing in the world could dampen it. "How was it? How was your first day?" SpongeBob sat beside him, the wood of the bench cool against his tired body. "It was
"Amazing," he whispered, almost afraid the word might vanish if he said it too loudly.
But it was hard to.
What if I can't keep making it amazing? Or what if one day I'm just ordinary?
Patrick tilted his head, thinking in his slow, careful way. "Ordinary isn't so bad," he said at last.
But you're not ordinary, SpongeBob. You care.
That's the difference. The simplicity of the words wrapped around SpongeBob like a warm blanket. He didn't always understand Patrick's wisdom until later, but he always felt its truth immediately. They sat in silence for a while, watching bubbles rise lazily through the water, drifting toward the fading sky. SpongeBob breathed deeply, letting the quiet calm him. The next morning would come with new customers, new orders, new chances for mistakes. But it would also come with new smiles, new laughter, new warmth.
And maybe that was enough. Not to guarantee perfection, but to promise presence. As the sky dimmed, SpongeBob whispered to himself, "I belong here."
Even if it's hard, I belong. And the bubbles above seemed to shimmer in agreement. Morning in Bikini Bottom began as it always did, softly, with ripples of light spilling down through the ocean's surface, carrying the colors of dawn. The sea was never truly still. Even its calmest hours breathed with movement, like the slow inhale and exhale of a sleeping giant. Inside his pineapple home, SpongeBob rose before the sun's warmth touched the sand. His alarm had already chimed, a cheerful, tinny tune that pulled him from dreams with gentle insistence. He sprang from bed, not with the clumsy fear of being late, but with a steady anticipation. Today was not his first day at the Krusty Krab. It was not even his second. It was simply one of many, folded into the fabric of his new life. And yet, to SpongeBob, that was its own kind of wonder. He dressed in his uniform with care, smoothing every edge of his square shirt, tying his red tie until it rested just right against his chest. Each morning he checked his reflection in the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of ritual. The reflection smiled back at him, bright-eyed and ready, a reminder that he was part of something larger than himself. As he stepped out into the quiet streets, the sea's soft current tugged gently at his limbs. The coral glowed faintly in the dawn, and the faint hum of the town's waking life began to stir. It was in these small, quiet walks that SpongeBob found himself humming. Not loud songs, not the triumphant jingles of achievement, but small tunes, wordless, flowing, like bubbles drifting upward. When he pushed open the doors of the Krusty Krab, the scent of the kitchen greeted him, warm and familiar. The griddle's surface gleamed, ready for the day's work. The spatula lay waiting, its handle cool under his hand. SpongeBob always paused for a moment before switching on the stove, breathing in the silence. There was a rhythm to it all, a pattern that unfolded with gentle precision. The hiss of the griddle warming, the soft pat of dough being shaped into buns, the quick slice of lettuce crisp and clean, the sizzle of patties as they met the heat. Each sound joined the others like notes in a song, a melody SpongeBob had come to love. Customers drifted in as the morning stretched into day. Some came with laughter, some with weary faces, some with nothing at all but hunger. To each of them, SpongeBob offered the same quiet care. He greeted them with a smile, placed their food on trays with steady hands, and watched as their expressions softened into contentment. It was not always easy. Some customers were impatient, some unkind. The orders piled high at times, overwhelming him. Yet, in the rhythm of the work, SpongeBob found a kind of peace. He learned that difficulty, repeated often enough, could be smoothed into habit. And habit, when tended with love, became something almost sacred. Squidward, as ever, remained a figure of contrast. He moved slowly, sighing at the register, his every gesture laced with reluctance. He seemed immune to the rhythm SpongeBob had found. But SpongeBob never let Squidward's gloom cast shadows over his light. Instead, he worked harder, smiled wider, hoping that one day even Squidward might hear the music hidden in the monotony. Mr. Krabs busied himself with coins, eyes gleaming, claws clicking as he counted. To him, the rhythm of the Krusty Krab was not the hiss of the grill, but the clink of treasure. And yet, SpongeBob realized in his own way, Mr. Krabs too was caught in the same song. Each of them played a part, whether they knew it or not. When the day ended, SpongeBob would step out into the evening light, his body tired, but his spirit full. He often found Patrick waiting for him, lounging on the sand with the easy patience of a star who had nowhere else to be. "How was it today?" Patrick always asked, as though the answer might surprise him. "It was the same," SpongeBob would reply. "And that's what makes it beautiful." Patrick never fully understood, but he nodded anyway, because friendship doesn't always need explanation. In time, SpongeBob began to notice how the rhythm of his days shaped him. His movements grew steadier, his confidence deeper. Where once he had trembled at the thought of failure, he now trusted in the music of repetition. Each day was not a burden, but a verse, adding to a song that stretched across his life. Even in his dreams, SpongeBob carried the rhythm with him. He dreamed of patties sizzling like lullabies, of laughter bubbling like streams, of spatulas moving like metronomes. His sleep was deep and untroubled, filled with the comfort of knowing he belonged. For in the gentle rhythm of days, SpongeBob found not just work, but meaning. He learned that belonging was not a single moment of triumph, nor a single fear conquered, but a weaving together of countless small acts, repeated until they became love made visible. And so the days flowed, one into the next, steady as the tide. SpongeBob rose each morning, walked to the Krusty Krab, flipped patties, smiled at strangers, and returned home beneath the fading light. It might have looked ordinary to anyone else, but to SpongeBob it was extraordinary in its simplicity, a song only he could hear, but one that carried him through the ocean of his life. There are hours in the ocean when the world seems to fold into itself. No rushing currents, no chatter of fish schools passing by, no bustle of work or errands. Only the hush, wide and unbroken, as if the sea itself were listening to its own heartbeat. SpongeBob had begun to notice these silences. They revealed themselves in slivers of the day, tucked between one order and the next, or in the space after laughter fades, but before new words arrive. At first, he thought little of them. He was a creature of energy, of movement, of joyful noise. Yet with each passing week at the Krusty Krab, he found himself leaning into these pauses as though they carried secrets meant just for him. One afternoon, the restaurant sat almost empty. A single jellyfish had drifted lazily against the window, glowing faintly, while Squidward leaned on the register with a sigh. Mr. Krabs was hidden in his office, shuffling through coins with his usual glee, and SpongeBob stood in the kitchen, spatula in hand, waiting for the griddle to cool. The silence stretched around him like a soft tide. No sizzling, no clattering trays, no customers calling out orders. Just stillness. It might have unnerved another cook, but for SpongeBob it felt like a gift. He breathed slowly, realizing how the silence seemed to magnify the little things, the faint hum of the lights, the soft shifting of Squidward's chair, the quiet pop of a distant bubble. Each sound was like a single star scattered across an empty sky. And in that space, SpongeBob felt something stir inside him. A recognition, almost like memory. He thought of his earliest mornings at home, when the sun had not yet broken the surface and the world seemed to sleep. Back then, he had always hurried, rushing toward the day. But now he lingered. He realized that silence was not absence. Silence was presence of everything unspoken, unseen, waiting to be felt. Later that evening, he walked home with Patrick. They ambled side by side, the sand squeaking faintly beneath them, the ocean floor unusually quiet. Patrick had been rambling about jellyfish, about how maybe they threw secret parties when no one was looking. But then he stopped, tilted his head and said, It's kind of quiet, huh? SpongeBob nodded.
Yeah, but quiet doesn't mean empty, Patrick squinted.
What else could it mean? SpongeBob smiled gently.
It means the world's taking a breath.
And we get to listen. Patrick didn't answer right away. He just let the thought float between them, as soft as the tide. The days that followed seemed filled with these pauses. During the morning rush, there would be a fleeting instant when SpongeBob caught Squidward staring off, not scowling, not sighing, just still. In the evenings, he'd find himself listening to the hush of his pineapple walls, how even the silence there seemed to hum with safety. And sometimes, while cooking, he noticed that the space between the hiss of one patty and the sizzle of another carried its own kind of music. The silence was not always comforting. There were days it pressed against him like weight, days when the Krusty Krab emptied early, leaving the air thick and lonely. On those nights, SpongeBob sat on the floor of his kitchen, spatula across his knees, staring at the shadows. A little ache would creep in, a longing he couldn't quite name. But even then, he didn't push the silence away. He let it stay, let it stretch until it softened into something he could hold. One night, after a long shift, SpongeBob wandered out to jellyfish fields. The moonlight shimmered through the water, painting the meadow silver. The jellyfish pulsed silently, glowing as they floated. He lay down on the sand and closed his eyes. The silence there was vast, yet tender. He thought of his parents, of how they'd watched him grow with patient eyes. He thought of Squidward, who might never admit it, but stayed at the Krusty Krab because it tethered him in some way. He thought of Mr. Krabs, alone with his coins, listening perhaps to the silence of a different kind. And in that stillness, SpongeBob felt small, but not in a sad way. Small like a single note in a long, gentle song, a note that mattered because it belonged. When he finally rose to leave, he whispered a thank you to the silence, not because it had answered his questions, but because it had asked none of him at all. It had simply allowed him to be. From then on, SpongeBob began to weave silence into his days the way one might fold rest into a lullaby. He paused between patties, let quiet sit between words, noticed when laughter gave way to stillness. He learned to carry silence not as emptiness, but as a companion. For silence, he discovered, was not the absence of sound. It was the language of everything too deep for words. The rhythm beneath rhythm, the heartbeat beneath the sea. And so SpongeBob continued his gentle work, flipping, smiling, listening. In the noise of the Krusty Krab, he found joy. In the silence between, he found meaning. Both were part of the same song, and as he drifted to sleep that night, tucked in his soft bed with the tide whispering outside, he realized something he would never forget. Sometimes, the most beautiful thing in the world is what you don't hear at all. Patrick was not a thinker in the way most creatures understood thinking. His mind moved like the tide, slowly, wandering, sometimes receding, sometimes rushing forward with sudden force. To others, he seemed absent, distracted, always a step behind the conversation. But SpongeBob had known him long enough to see something more. Patrick was listening, always listening, in ways that didn't require cleverness or quick replies. It was on a quiet morning, after another long shift at the Krusty Krab, that SpongeBob found Patrick waiting by the coral arch near Jellyfish Fields. He was lying flat on his back, arms spread wide, eyes half closed as though measuring the width of the ocean above him. "Patrick?" SpongeBob called softly. Patrick turned his head, smiling without hurry.
"Hey, buddy." SpongeBob lay down beside him, the sand cool beneath his square body.
Together, they watched the light filter down from the surface. For a long time, neither of them spoke. At first, SpongeBob thought Patrick might simply be lost in thought, or perhaps not thinking at all. But then Patrick sighed, a sound soft as the drift of seaweed, and said, "You were right." "About what?" The quiet,
It isn't empty, it's...
big. Patrick's voice lingered on the last word, as though it carried more than he could explain. SpongeBob turned to look at him. Patrick's eyes were wide, reflecting the shimmering surface above. "What do you mean by big?" SpongeBob asked gently. Patrick took his time. "Like, when you sit here and don't say anything, it feels like the ocean gets bigger inside you."
like there's more room, like...
"Maybe it's always been there, but you only notice when you're quiet." SpongeBob's chest warmed. He smiled, though it was a soft smile touched by awe. "That's exactly it, Patrick." And so they stayed, the two of them side by side, saying nothing more for a while. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel like waiting for words, but like words had already been spoken, only in another language. Later, as they wandered back into town, Patrick's steps were slower, more deliberate. He paused at odd moments, gazing at things SpongeBob had long overlooked. The faint shimmer of a snail's trail, the way tiny bubbles collected in the cracks of the pavement, the hush of corals swaying in unison. "Have those always been there?" Patrick asked, eyes wide with childlike wonder. "Yes," SpongeBob said. "But maybe we're only just now seeing them," Patrick nodded, as though this made perfect sense. In the days that followed, their friendship began to weave silence into its fabric. They still laughed, still chased jellyfish and shared silly jokes, but between those bursts of joy, they let silence linger. Where once SpongeBob might have filled every pause with chatter, he now let the stillness breathe. And Patrick, in his unhurried way, responded not with words, but with presence. One evening, they sat on the roof of SpongeBob's pineapple house, legs dangling into the water. The town lay hushed beneath them, the glow of lanterns casting sleepy patterns across the sand. "Do you ever think about
Forever?
Patrick asked suddenly, his voice unusually soft. SpongeBob tilted his head. "Forever?"
Yeah, like...
All the days lined up, one after the other. It feels too big sometimes. But when it's quiet like this, I don't feel scared.
I just feel... Okay. SpongeBob reached out and placed his hand gently on Patrick's arm.
That's because you're not alone, Patrick. Forever is just forever. But when we share it, it feels like home. Patrick's eyes glistened in the lantern light. He didn't say anything, just leaned a little closer, as though words would have been too small for the feeling. From that night on, SpongeBob began to see how Patrick's understanding of silence was different from his own. Where SpongeBob treated it as a rhythm, a pattern between work and rest, Patrick treated it like a sea cave, deep, echoing, full of hidden space. Both were true, and together their friendship stretched wider, deeper, fuller. Even Squidward noticed. One afternoon at the Krusty Krab, he glanced out the window to see SpongeBob and Patrick sitting together on the curb, sharing an ice cream cone in total silence. Squidward rolled his eyes, muttering something about idiots wasting time. But as he turned back to the register, a faint flicker of curiosity touched his frown. He wondered, just for a moment, what they heard in all that quiet. The truth was, SpongeBob and Patrick weren't hearing anything at all.
They were feeling it.
Feeling the unspoken comfort of knowing someone was near. Feeling the way silence could be heavy and light all at once, like water carrying them without effort. In that stillness, SpongeBob learned a new kind of wisdom. That love did not always shout, or laugh, or sing. Sometimes it was quiet, barely there, like the soft brush of a current against the skin. Sometimes it asked nothing, gave nothing, only stayed. And Patrick, in his simple way, showed him that staying was enough. That night, as SpongeBob tucked himself into bed, he thought of the day, of Patrick's slow words, of their shared silences, of the way the world had seemed bigger yet safer at the same time. He whispered a thank you into the dark, not to anyone in particular, but to the silence itself, and before sleep carried him away.
He knew this, that in a world full of sound and motion,
the truest kind of friendship was sometimes measured not in what was said, but in what was understood without speaking at all. The sea holds memories the way sand holds footprints, not forever, not unchanging, but long enough for someone to pause, to notice, to remember. SpongeBob had come to realize this truth during the quiet evenings that followed his shifts, when the currents slowed and the stars shimmered faintly through the water. He often sat outside his pineapple home, legs folded neatly, spatula resting across his lap like a keepsake. Patrick was usually near, lying on his back with his eyes closed, as though he trusted the water itself to hold him. Together they drifted into conversations that weren't always conversations, moments where memory spoke louder than words. One evening, after a long silence, Patrick murmured, "Do you remember the first time we caught a jellyfish?" SpongeBob's eyes softened. He could see it instantly, the two of them stumbling through jellyfish fields, nets too large for their small hands, laughter bubbling from their mouths as though it had no end. They had chased and fallen, scraped knees on coral, yet somehow they had caught one, a jellyfish so small it seemed almost shy. "I remember," SpongeBob whispered. "You were so excited you dropped your net." Patrick chuckled sleepily.
And you let the jellyfish go even though we tried so hard.
"You said it was better that way." SpongeBob nodded. "I didn't really know why then, but I think I do now." "Why?" "Because some things aren't meant to be kept, Patrick. They're meant to be remembered." Patrick didn't answer, but the way his breathing slowed told SpongeBob that he understood. As the days passed, these memories rose more often. The ordinary rhythm of work would stir them, the clink of a spatula reminding him of his first day at the Krusty Krab, the sound of Squidward's sigh echoing all the other sighs that had once seemed unbearable but now felt oddly comforting. Even the way Mr. Krabs laughed while counting coins brought back the image of his younger self, trembling on that first morning, trying so hard to belong. The weight of these memories wasn't heavy in the way of burdens. It was heavy in the way of blankets, soft, layered, covering him with warmth. Sometimes memories arrived in dreams. SpongeBob would find himself walking through the old hallways of his childhood, hearing the voices of his parents calling him in for dinner, the smell of kelp noodles drifting through the water. He dreamed of old games, old songs, little things long gone. And when he woke, the ache in his chest wasn't sadness exactly. It was something gentler, a longing that was tender rather than sharp. One night, after a particularly long day at the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob and Patrick sat at Goo Lagoon, watching the moonlight paint the waves. The beach was empty, the hush of the sea wrapping them in its timeless embrace. "Do you ever feel like the past is still here?" SpongeBob asked quietly. Patrick blinked. "Like behind us?"
No, more like around us. Like it never really leaves.
"It just becomes part of the water." Patrick scratched his chin. "So when we swim, we're swimming through memories?" SpongeBob smiled. "Yes, maybe that's exactly it." Patrick nodded slowly as though the thought made perfect sense to him. "Then we should swim carefully," he said, "so we don't break anything." SpongeBob laughed softly, but there was wisdom in Patrick's words. Memories were fragile, not because they disappeared, but because they could be forgotten if not held with care. In the weeks that followed, SpongeBob began to notice how memory wove itself into his daily life. A child ordering a simple patty reminded him of his own younger days, full of eagerness and clumsy hope. A couple sharing fries at the table brought him flashes of old friendships, the kind that slipped away like tides. Even Squidward's music, sour and heavy, carried echoes of something gentler, as though Squidward, too, carried memories he could not name aloud, and SpongeBob realized something he had never seen so clearly before. Memory was not just about looking back, it was also about carrying forward. Every moment lived became tomorrow's echo. Every act of kindness, every shared silence, every laugh with Patrick. They were all becoming memories already. One evening, after Patrick had gone home, SpongeBob sat alone in his kitchen. He placed his spatula on the table and stared at it for a long time. To anyone else, it was just a tool, but to him, it was layered with memory. The trembling grip of his first day, the sweat of long shifts, the joy of discovering rhythm, the pride of serving with love. It was not metal and wood anymore. It was memory, solid enough to touch. He whispered to himself, maybe that's what legacy is, just memories that keep cooking long after the fire's out. The thought lingered in the stillness. He felt both small and infinite, like a bubble rising, breaking, and becoming part of the air above. Before sleep took him that night, he whispered a quiet promise. To keep making memories worth carrying. Not grand ones, not heroic ones, but simple ones. The kind that settled gently, like grains of sand, until one day they became the very ground beneath his feet, and in that promise, the weight of memory did not press down on him.
Instead, it lifted him, reminding him that every day, no matter how small,
No matter how ordinary, could become something soft, something lasting, something that would one day glow quietly in the silence of tomorrow. There are moments in life when holding on feels natural,
as though our hearts were built with nets to catch everything we love.
but as SpongeBob began to notice, the sea itself taught another lesson. It never held its waves, never clutched its foam. It let everything move, everything drift, and yet nothing was truly lost. It began one evening at the Krusty Krab, after the last customer had gone and the lights glowed dim in the corners. SpongeBob was wiping down the counter when he noticed a small scratch carved into the wood. Faint, almost invisible, but there. He remembered instantly. It was from his very first day, when his hands had trembled so much that the tray slipped, leaving a mark. For a moment, his chest tightened. That scratch was a memory, sharp, vivid, alive. He touched it gently, wondering how long it would last. Would someone sand it away one day? Would it fade under years of work? The thought unsettled him, until something deeper settled in. Maybe it didn't matter. The memory lived in him, not just in the wood. Even if the scratch vanished, the story remained.
And that was enough.
That night, as he walked home under the pale shimmer of the moon, he thought of all the things he had once tried to hold too tightly. Jellyfish that slipped through his fingers, songs he had forgotten the words to, even the days of his childhood that seemed to shrink the harder he tried to keep them. He realized slowly that love was not about holding everything forever. Sometimes love was about letting go with gentleness. Patrick noticed the change in him. One afternoon, they were sitting on the sand watching waves roll in slow motion. Patrick had brought a jar inside which a jellyfish pulsed faintly, glowing with quiet patience. "Look, SpongeBob," Patrick said. Proud of his catch, SpongeBob smiled. But after a moment he reached out and lifted the lid. The jellyfish drifted upward, free again, leaving the jar empty. "Why'd you do that?" Patrick asked, not angry, just confused. "Because it doesn't belong in a jar," SpongeBob said softly. "It belongs in the water, and we'll remember it better this way." Patrick blinked, then slowly nodded. "Like the past?" SpongeBob's smile deepened. "Exactly, like the past." From then on, SpongeBob began practicing the art of letting go in small, almost invisible ways. When a batch of patties burned, he didn't cling to frustration. He simply flipped the next with renewed care. When Squidward sighed and muttered sharp words, SpongeBob didn't take them to heart. He let them pass, like currents that flowed without staying. Even with memories, he found softness in release. He no longer tried to recall every detail of childhood or hold every moment in perfect clarity. Instead, he let them fade into a blur, trusting that what mattered would stay. Not as exact images, but as warmth, as light as feeling. One evening, While lying in jellyfish fields, SpongeBob whispered to the drifting creatures above him.
Thank you for teaching me to float. It wasn't that he wanted to forget.
It wasn't even that he didn't care. It was simply that he had begun to understand. Life moved like the tide. To fight it was to exhaust yourself. To flow with it was to find peace. The sea itself seemed to echo this truth. Waves rolled in, waves rolled out, clouds passed, stars shifted across the dark. Nothing stayed, but nothing was lost either. Each thing became part of something larger, something endless. Patrick, too, learned in his own way. One night, as they sat side by side under the soft glow of lanternfish, Patrick sighed and said, "I used to wish we could stay kids forever. But maybe it's okay that we don't." SpongeBob turned to him, eyes glistening. "Why do you say that?" "Because if we stayed the same, we wouldn't have today."
And today is
"Pretty good." SpongeBob reached out and squeezed his friend's hand. They said nothing more because nothing more was needed. In the quiet that followed, SpongeBob thought about the jellyfish, about the scratch on the Krusty Krab's counter, about the songs he half remembered. He thought about how each had slipped away in its own time, and yet each had left something behind, something soft, something true. Letting go, he realized, did not mean losing. It meant trusting. Trusting that what was meant to stay would stay, not in jars or scratches or words, but in the gentle fabric of his heart. That night, as he drifted into sleep, SpongeBob felt lighter than he had in a long time. His dreams were not crowded with old memories or heavy with longing. They were simple, quiet. Bubbles rising into the night, dissolving into stars. And when he woke, he whispered to himself, "It's okay."
everything is okay. There was a stillness in Bikini Bottom that only arrived after midnight.
The streets hushed, the waves smoothed themselves into whispers, and even the jellyfish pulsed more slowly in the fields, as though the entire sea were rocking itself to sleep. It was in this stillness that SpongeBob began to sense something new, a melody that wasn't sound, but feeling. It was the lullaby of tomorrow. He first noticed it one quiet evening, sitting on his pineapple porch with his chin resting on his hands. The night sky stretched above him, filled with drifting bioluminescent plankton, like stars that had decided to swim close for comfort. The silence wasn't empty. It was soft, alive, carrying a gentle promise that tomorrow would come and that it could be kind. For so long, SpongeBob had clung to yesterday. He had feared losing the bright mornings of his youth, the laughter echoing across jellyfish fields, the simple joy of discovering the Krusty Krab for the first time. But now, after learning the tenderness of letting go, he realized something beautiful. Tomorrow was not a thief, it was a giver. It offered new mornings, new laughter, new discoveries, not to replace the old, but to continue the song. He thought of the jellyfish he had released back into the ocean. At first, it had seemed like loss, but the more he remembered that moment, the more he understood. Releasing was not the end. It was the beginning of something else. The jellyfish had gone back to the wide sea, to drift under stars, to live its own tomorrows. Maybe that's what tomorrow is, SpongeBob whispered to himself. A place where everything is free to drift. Patrick joined him the next night. They sat on the porch together, their legs dangling, feet tapping the sandy ground below. Patrick looked up at the glowing plankton blinking slowly. "Do you ever wonder," Patrick said, "what tomorrow looks like before it arrives?" SpongeBob tilted his head. "Like a song we haven't heard yet. We know it's coming, but we don't know the notes." Patrick smiled sleepily.
I like that.
Tomorrow as a song. From that night on, SpongeBob began to hear the ocean differently. Its tides weren't only memories washing away. They were invitations. Each wave whispered, "Come see what I will bring." Even the Krusty Krab began to feel like a doorway to tomorrow. Every patty he flipped, every tray he carried, became less about repeating the past and more about shaping the future. A new customer could arrive at any time, a new smile could appear, a new story could unfold. The ordinary became fresh, touched with possibility. Squidward, of course, scoffed when SpongeBob mentioned it one afternoon. Tomorrow? Tomorrow is just another excuse for more work. But SpongeBob only grinned. That's one way to see it, Squidward. But maybe tomorrow is also a chance for things to surprise us. Squidward rolled his eyes, but SpongeBob noticed something. The tiniest flicker of thought crossing his neighbor's face. Even Squidward, under all his size, could be touched by the promise of tomorrow. SpongeBob began keeping little rituals at night, ways of listening for the lullaby. Sometimes he sat quietly and breathed with the rhythm of the waves. Other times he whispered a thank you to the stars before bed. And on especially tender nights, he hummed his own lullabies, soft and wordless, letting his voice float like bubbles rising into the dark. He found that tomorrow grew gentler when welcomed. It no longer felt like an unknown cliff or a heavy tide. It felt like a cradle, rocking him, carrying him forward. One evening, Patrick said, "What if tomorrow doesn't come?" SpongeBob thought for a moment, then smiled. Then the lullaby becomes forever. And that's okay too, the sea seemed to approve. A breeze passed, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed, and SpongeBob closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. He felt no fear, only trust. Trust that the same way jellyfish drifted, the same way waves returned, tomorrow would arrive when it was ready, bringing its own small miracles. In the days that followed, SpongeBob noticed himself becoming lighter. He laughed more easily, worked more calmly, and even when mistakes happened, a tray dropped, a patty overcooked, he no longer winced. Instead, he thought, tomorrow will give me another chance. And it always did. One night, lying in bed, he gazed at the soft glow of his nightlight, shaped like a star. The hum of the ocean outside mixed with his slow breathing. He whispered aloud, as if to the sea itself, "Thank you for today, and thank you for tomorrow too." The words floated out the window into the night, and somewhere beyond in the deep, the lullaby of tomorrow answered back steady and kind, wrapping SpongeBob in its song until he drifted into sleep. He dreamed not of the past, but of mornings yet to come, of sunlight breaking on the horizon, of laughter waiting to be born, of paths still unseen. His dreams were not about holding on anymore. They were about opening, and when morning arrived, it did so gently, like the next note in a melody. SpongeBob rose, smiling, ready to step into the song of a new day. There are endings that arrive like thunder, sudden and loud, shaking everything apart. And then there are endings that come like the tide, soft, steady, carrying you without resistance. SpongeBob's story belonged to the tide. By now, the days at the Krusty Krab had become a rhythm, like the gentle beat of a lullaby. The sizzle of patties, the clink of plates, the quiet shuffle of feet across the floorboards. Each sound wove itself into a song of belonging. He did not need to chase greatness. He only needed to be present. And presence, he realized, was its own kind of greatness. Sometimes, when the rush of customers subsided, he would pause by the kitchen window and gaze out at the open water. It shimmered with its own secrets, stretching far beyond what he could see. He felt no urge to conquer it, no ache to know it all. It was enough to witness, to admire, to let the vastness remind him of something both humbling and kind, that life was larger than any single sponge, yet still tender enough to hold him within it. At night, in the stillness of his pineapple home, SpongeBob often thought back to his first morning walking up to the Krusty Krab, how his hands had trembled, how his heart had carried both fear and hope, how a single door, once strange and daunting, had become the threshold to his life. He smiled softly whenever those memories surfaced. He did not cling to them anymore. Instead, he let them drift through him like bubbles rising, translucent and fleeting. Each bubble was a reminder. Everything comes, everything passes, and still everything matters. Patrick remained his truest companion. They often sat together under the starlit water, sharing simple thoughts that needed no polish. One evening, Patrick asked, "Do you think we'll remember all of this when we're older?" SpongeBob tilted his head, thoughtful. "Maybe not every detail, but I think the feelings stay. The laughter, the kindness, the way we cared for each other. Those don't fade. They live inside us like the sea." Patrick nodded, yawning, his eyes half closed. "And that's enough." And SpongeBob agreed. Squidward, too, though never eager to admit it, had grown gentler. He still sighed, still muttered under his breath, still longed for quiet that never quite arrived. But there were moments, small, glimmering, when SpongeBob caught the hint of a smile tugging at Squidward's face, a shared silence after closing time, a subtle softness when he played his clarinet, believing no one was listening.
SpongeBob never pointed it out.
He only let it be, knowing that even quiet bonds were real bonds. There was no grand finale to his life, no fireworks or triumphs shouted across the ocean.
Instead, there was a steady unfolding like a flower that never needed to hurry.
He found joy in small acts, wiping a table with care, greeting a stranger with warmth, singing softly to himself while washing dishes. In each act, he left a trace of love behind, as light as a bubble, as enduring as the sea. One night, lying in bed, he whispered into the darkness, "I thought I needed to prove myself.
I thought I had to chase something bigger.
But all along, I just needed to be here. To love, to laugh, to share my days with others."
That's enough.
"That's everything," the ocean answered with its eternal hush, waves brushing against the shore as if to say, "Yes, you've understood." In that moment, SpongeBob realized something tender. The sea was not only around him, it was within him. Its patience, its vastness, its rhythm, all of it lived inside his heart. And that meant he could carry it anywhere, even into dreams. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, letting the eternal sea within rock him like a cradle. Memories swirled gently. His first spatula, Patrick's laughter, Squidward's clarinet, Mr. Krabs' booming voice, the glow of jellyfish, the taste of salt on the breeze. They did not come to demand anything of him. They came to rest with him, companions in the quiet, and so in the deepest hour of night, he let himself drift. And in the stillness of the sea, he rested.
A sponge who once only dreamed, now quietly dig the dream.
Somewhere beneath the waves, he is still flipping, still laughing, still glowing in the warmth of small kindnesses. The song of the ocean lulled him, and perhaps you too as you listen, a reminder that you, like SpongeBob, carry an eternal sea within, a sea of memory, love, and quiet wonder, a sea that asks for nothing more than your gentle being. Thanks for spending this time with us. Sleep well.
Everything's going to be okay, man.